Welcome to Chromecast. Check it out. I'm Sam Major, Commercial Director for Krome Technologies, and I'm joined once again by Doug Elsley, Microsoft Practice Lead.
Hi.
So Doug, we're talking about the hot topic, it's been around for a while, but it's really gathering steam, is Microsoft Copilot.
Yeah, I think what we want to cover today is really what is Copilot. I think there's been some news around sort of AI, so getting to understand really what Copilot is. Also understand the risks. A lot of people are concerned about putting these inside organisations, so we can cover some of those topics. And then probably also connecting to other data sources, not just Microsoft, and what's going to happen in the future with it. How's it going to evolve into a new world for people to work in?
Very pertinent question. Okay, so let's jump into, I guess, you said it right there. Is it AI? How does it leverage it, etc.? So specifically, what is Copilot?
So Copilot is really, I guess you can look at it as its term is, the person that sits next to the pilot in the plane is doing some of the things for them. So it's using artificial intelligence and technology in the background to surface some of the easier tasks or some of the tasks that people may not want to do. So if you're trying to consolidate an email, if you're trying to do a report and gather some information into them, if you're trying to look at information across your organisation and sort of build some intelligence around that. And it's using what are called LLMs to
large language
models, which pulls into it,
which that's essentially, just to cover off, we're talking ChatGPT as an LLM, just for point of reference, right?
Yeah, indeed, yeah. And it uses also the Microsoft graph. So there's a lot of information in the background that it can actually rely on and actually use to actually surface information up to users, and hopefully make their jobs a little bit easier. So that's really what Copilot is. I mean, we'll cover a lot more of that bit later on, but yeah, essentially that's what it is.
Okay. Well, I suppose we get into this then, because I think a lot of people, it's very easy when you say it's like an LLM, it's like a ChatGPT. You can't understand what it's doing. It's using information it's gathered to make lives easier, right? As you said, take some of the work out, the more mundane tasks. And you see it, and not to say Copilot, but certainly just in Microsoft, you start typing now and it's getting further and further and further ahead based on learned behaviours. So I guess in all of this then will be the thing is what are the risks?
A number of risks, and people are kind of right to think about some of the risks. But inherently, when organisations, if they've got something like M365 in place, they've already got their data exposed and open if they haven't sort of locked it down. So if you look at things like SharePoint drives, if they got shares open, people can access documents and go and grab other bits and pieces. If they haven't classified, if they haven't labelled, if they haven't sort of gone through some kind of evaluation to inside their organisation to see what can me as a user see across my organisation. And it could be, if you're looking at a merger as a business, for instance, you may have documents that are sat in an open share that everyone has access to. Now, they may not look for it and they may not where to look, but fundamentally they still have access to those things. So Copilot may actually go in and look into those areas and may be able to surface some of those documents.
Okay.
So you've got to think about just enough access. So
I was about to say, so is the risk there? It could essentially be presenting information to someone that you wouldn't necessarily want them to access.
Yeah, and people may not be aware of those today. As I said, it's there by default today. If you've got M365 and these things are open shares and SharePoints and other documents,
but this will highlight.
It may highlight it. So if you said I want to see all the potential IP mergers or share with inside the company, this may go and pull back those documents. So you've got to think about those. So certainly before you go through things like this, test, validate, make sure that you've got your organisation locked down. So again, you're using rights management, you're being able to classify and label documents to be sensitive or confidential, and then having users not have rights to maybe those shares and those documents that they shouldn't have access to. So it's a really good exercise that people should go through anyway.
I was about to say, it is, excuse me, thinking kind of from a compliance perspective, it's the sort of thing people should do anyway, but you've got a way of not doing it because people don't necessarily know that I have access to X, Y, Z that I shouldn't really have access to. But there's no real way in my day-to-day of me finding that or realising it. But if I start asking ChatGPT, I said then, start asking Copilot, what about this? Even a broad search, tell me all about.
Yeah.
I assume then it should go, well, actually, I'll tell you all about, and in your sphere, you can access all of that from here. So that's where I'm going to get the things that I probably shouldn't, that the business, certainly compliance on, don't know I have access to, and certainly shouldn't.
Yeah, and that again, that's the purpose of the Microsoft Graph. So if you look at the Microsoft Graph, it is an all-encompassing knowledge database that knows about when I opened a document, when I saved a document, when I sent an email or sent a Teams message or whatever it is. All of that is telemetry in the background. Now, that is secure within inside the organisation. That's probably the most important thing to address here, is this Copilot is enterprise grade. It makes sure that you have commercial data protection, so it's retained within inside your organisation, so you haven't got to worry about data going out of the organisation. It's more about the intelligence within inside the organisation, and again, that should be a structural review that you should go through to make sure that you understand what rights, if I look at what rights I have access to, and if everyone knows what they're doing, they can poke into different places and see what they can find from a document point of view. They can do that today. It just becomes a little bit more automated with Copilot.
Okay. All right, so moving forward from that point, we're talking about the evolution of it, what it will look like in the future, but I guess also to shoehorn into that same point, feeding it other sources, because right now we're talking about leveraging it in that Microsoft space. Whilst most of our customers are, there's an awful lot of Microsoft out there, there are other vendors involved, and this is a very powerful utility. How do we leverage that in other areas?
Well, through connectors, we'll talk some stuff a bit later on about some of the things that were announced last week in Ignite. But you'll use, again, large language modules and connectors that will go into things like Adobe or Salesforce. So it can go look inside PDF files, it can go and look at your CRM database, it can look at your call logging systems, whatever. And again, we're talking about the security risk of this, but that's actually really, really helpful. When you start looking forward for maybe first line support, they're able to really gather some intelligence information that is already logged calls.
Yeah.
So how do you then, as a new joiner joins, they can say, okay, what's a DNS issue? How do I resolve a DNS issue? And it will come back with already known issues and problems that they can look up very, very quickly. And then from a sales point of view, if you're going into Salesforce, what's my white space gap analysis across a customer? So, those things that normally you spend a lot of time with spreadsheets, number crunching.
You can spend an awful lot of time,
yeah.
carving or doing the data mining yourself. Just the speed of being able to utilise something like this to return that, and it is quick, right? So, when you think of the savings you can make by utilising it properly, it's enormous.
Yeah, indeed. And I think the interesting part is a lot of people don't quite get yet, but it will happen over time. You need to learn. It's a natural language, but it's a language you've got to learn. So if you go and say, tell me everything about this customer, then it doesn't know what to do. But when you learn the language models that you put around it and you start being more specific and more calculated about, then it will generate more interesting, focused answers for you that will be more intelligent for you to use later on. So if you're writing a sales proposal, you could take an existing document, bring that document in and put it into a sales proposal, or rewrite it in a more professional style, and it will rewrite it for you by using, again, there's a whole load of...
for me yet.
There's maybe hope for you yet. But there's this semantic engine that runs in the background that actually looks up and understands a correlation between two different points or two different words, and understands how to sort of make that the next word or construct sentences. So, it's a great evolution. We're right on the front of it. But yes, there are more things coming, and there are easier ways to help you manage those scenarios with other connectors as well.
Okay. Is it worth diving into that? You said there's some interesting stuff coming out of Ignite.
Yeah.
We'll talk about the evolution. I guess let's look into some of the things it's doing now and potentially what's next then.
Yeah, okay. So currently you've got things like Copilot, and we've seen it for a long time. You've seen ChatGPT, it's in Bing, it's in the search engines.
Yeah.
That's an interesting area because there's now a separation between, so using Enter ID or from old Azure Active Directory, it now understands what's public facing and what's internal. So using effectively Copilot in Bing for work, and so it'll only search internally and then externally as well. So Bing's been there for a long time. Windows, obviously, as with Windows 11, has now got some Copilot built into it, so you can very easily ask, change my configuration to a dark mode, and it can do that for you rather than you having to learn where it is in settings and bits and pieces like that. Then there's M365 that we've been talking about, and that's really going to kind of evolve. But some stuff with inside M365 is announced again in Ignite was the Copilot Studio. So this is where you are able to build your own GPT engines and your own language models and connectors, and you can actually start building workflows into them. So this is where you can start bringing other data sources and make them more interesting to you. Also, there was a Viva dashboard, so not just implementing Copilot, but actually is it being used across business and we're making cost savings. So there's now a dashboard that plugs into Viva of how you're using these things. And then other advancements that have come along with inside Copilot have been Copilot for sales. So again, plugging into CRM, we talked about that already, for GitHub for developers. So literally being able to grab any source code and start building things. So it's not changing people's jobs, it's enhancing how they can quickly sort of build things together. But the two big announcements that happened this week in Ignite were really around Copilot for security.
Have a look at that, it's quite impressive.
Yeah, so that's going to be looking really into, again, using the query languages into it. Am I at risk? What vulnerabilities am I exposed to? Has this IP address been hit lots of times? You can ask those really simple questions rather than, again, searching, validating, running reports and having to, so you can do some very simple things that may cut a lot of time. And then the last one that they announced that I think is going into, it's in preview but it's coming out next year, is going to be Copilot Service.
Okay.
So service is really, as we talked about for the first line help desks and responsive things, how do I get some of that first line information back in? So in the first line you can say, if you're a company that sells tents, for instance, and someone wants to do a replacement of a tent or what's the warranty, they can literally just type in what's the warranty on the tent. So there's an external chatbot kind of thing that happens from an end user consumer point of view.
I see, I hadn't thought of it like that, okay.
And then obviously internally, if someone's just joined the help desk, they don't know exactly what the company's about, they can literally type into these things and get those answers, responses, and generate emails and invoices and shipping items, because all that knowledge is contained within the documents that it can then use to actually generate the output.
It's genius. It's very clever, and I think there was obviously lots of, when AI came out, it was all, it's going to take all of the blue collar jobs and it'll be driving trucks and doing this, that and the other, and now people go, actually it's a lot of white collar stuff where it's really having a measurable impact. And I don't see it putting people out of jobs. I see it changing the way people work quite significantly, but if you're not just sat there doing busy work and actually doing something more constructive, then all the power to it.
Yeah, and I mean, some of the stats that came out of Ignite were 10% of first line calls were solved more quickly or without other employee interactions. So people were able to solve the problems themselves rather than having to rely on other people. So again, measuring that output, how efficient it is, there was a lot of work done in those studies to actually measure those outputs. But ultimately, yes, it's going to be your little co-system that's going to help you do things. So hopefully it will be a great evolution.
Right back to the little paperclip that used to be.
yeah, back in those days. But that was the start of it, right? So that's asking you, what can I do to help you? But I think the amount of data and having internal corporate data that's relevant to your organisation rather than just general chat from the web is really important.
Everyone's talked a long time about obviously that data is what the worth of data, and all this is people, social media companies have spent years and years and years collecting it, and now actually it's businesses leveraging their own data and having a utility tool, a way of people have inputted information into the system for a long time. Like the help desk is a great example. You're trying to tackle a problem. This path has been trod many times before, and I know you lock it into KBs and so on, but actually if you could go how to, and there it is, it's a great time saver. Yeah,
definitely. And as I said, when you're going through that, I think the interesting parts is people, when you're looking at data is great, and I love data, as you know, but it gives you different ways to analyse data. I mean, there's an interesting story, a company was trying to set up a shop in a shopping centre, and they went to a phone company for the data, and it was looking for the GPS, the telemetry of who walks past the shop, what's the demographic, what's the age of the audience, and suddenly you start thinking completely differently. I don't just put my business here for a reason. I do it from a load of different telemetry data that give me good input. So this is now the way that you can really probably pull in different data sources and get different results and open up different areas of business.
And do it quickly.
Perfect.
Cool. Listen, Doug, interesting as always. Thank you very much. Cool. And thank you for joining us on this episode of Chromecast. Check it out. Remember to like, subscribe and share. And if anything you'd like us to cover in future episodes, please leave that in the comment section below. Thank you. Check it out.